Maybe we should get started. What do you think? People might trickle in. So, thanks for coming. My name's Brandon Bickler. I'm a partner in a very small consulting firm based out of London. You can hear from the accent that I'm not originally from London. I grew up in the United States, in Dallas, Texas. Went to school down in Austin, at the University of Texas. But I've been in Europe for about, 17 years now. So I lived in Germany for 8 years, Switzerland for a year, and I've been in the UK for the rest of the time. Before I got into consulting, I did work in industry. I was just telling, my very first job was at Price Waterhouse, and I got trained in COBOL and C and Power Builder, some fun stuff back in the 90s. And I did my focus was on delivering big kind of ERP projects for several years. I worked in industry. I had managed IT development and operations for Lucent Technologies, and Lucent went through lots of turmoil in the early kind of 2000s. After the dot-com bubble burst, you had the telecom bubble burst. I experienced both of those firsthand, which was interesting. So I would split my time between Asia and Europe at that time, basically driving big dev projects and driving operations. So that's me. As I mentioned, I'm based in London, but I kind of split my time between Silicon Valley and London, and we'll talk a little bit about today why I'm doing that. I've called this session Shining a Light on Shadow IT. I'll talk a little bit about why I've mentioned Shadow IT, and we'll do a bit of a definition of how I'll kind of broadly define that today. But essentially what I'll talk about is what I see as a new way of working that's required for business and IT. In my role now, I spend a lot of time, probably as equal amount of time with business executives as I do with technology executives, and I've seen this. I continue to see this big gap between the way we work together, and I've seen it for the last 20 years, and it still exists, but it just doesn't, it's not sustainable anymore. So I'm going to give you some ideas for how we can do something a little bit different, okay? I will make this very interactive. Everyone probably says that, but we've got a pretty small group, so if you have a question, just raise your hand and speak up, and we can have a bit of a chat. And also, I will make this interactive, so I have a way to ask you some questions and do some live polling. So I thought, what the heck, we'll just try that. So if you've got a phone or anything that's connected to the internet or on Wi-Fi, you might need that, because I'll ask you some questions, and we'll see like real-time results on the questions I'm asking you along the way. If that's okay? Good. And I'll have to move around a little bit because I've got to control these slides here. So I'm going to talk about three themes today. So the first theme I'm going to talk about is, I think, for the last few decades, we've been kind of in a vicious loop where we've kind of been in this loop where we've been working on kind of controlling and governing everything we're doing around IT because applications have exploded and gotten out of control, costs have gotten very high, and we've responded to that very much from kind of a centralization and standardization response. And as a result, we've been rather slow in responding to some of the changing and emerging business needs along the way. So I'll talk a little bit about that vicious loop and some of the consequences of that. Second, I'll talk about kind of some of the changes that I've been seeing, and I'm sure you've been seeing, where businesses today are waking up, sometimes a rude awakening, to figure out that, technology is no longer something that's back office or something that, I've got my IT guy worries about. It's it's a boardroom topic. Technology is now a boardroom topic, and executives who are not so savvy in IT are really trying to waking up to the fact of technology is now a core competency for my business, and what does that mean? But I think that there's still a huge disconnect between the business and technology teams, and that's what I'll really focus on, and I'll suggest a model for how we can work better together between business and technology, and I'll walk through what I mean by that. I call it kind of a platform for innovation, and I'll talk through what I mean by that, and that'll be the three themes that we'll talk about today. First and foremost, shadow IT. There's a lot of definitions for what that means. I'll use a broad definition today. I think I went to Wikipedia and pulled a semi-official definition of what shadow IT means, but essentially it's any technology team that's basically not official within the organization. So we've seen it. They could be business-embedded technology teams. They could be, emerging. We've seen a lot of digital teams popping up in companies. But essentially any technology teams that are not really under the auspices of, let's say, a CIO or an enterprise IT team is something that we commonly refer to as shadow IT. So let's start with our first poll. And I'm going to try to do this. So the first question is, if this one's not showing, by the way. The first question that I'll ask you is, in your company, do you have a significant amount of shadow IT or technologies working outside, let's say, the CIO's organization in your company? Let's ask that first question. And the way that you can answer this question is you can go to pollev, .com, and I think technology. pollev.com /Elixirr. You can see it actually over here. There we go. So if you answer that question, if you log on there, what you do is simply you'll see this same, should see this same question when you go there. And if you don't see it, let me know. And you can answer if you have a significant amount of shadow IT or any kind of technology teams working outside of the CIO's organization in your company. And it can be, the URL is pollev.com /Elixirr. Sorry, you can't see that, so let me just do this. And Elixirr is spelled Elixirr, 2 R's. Elixirr. There we go. Somebody's found it. Thought we'd go for a bit of an experiment here. There we go. And we can see real time what's happening if you can see that screen. It's kind of weird that we're doing this on 2 screens. Sorry for that. Interesting. So really kind of an even split between quite a lot of kind of technology teams out of the auspices of the CIO and some have, you know, almost equally split a little. And then, you know, some of you are not seeing that at all, which is quite interesting. If we go to the next question, which is, okay, if in those teams that have shadow IT, you know, that's going on, what visibility do you have in terms of what they're working on? How much visibility do you have about what they're working on? Interesting. So around 84% limited or no visibility, with about 16% of you actually having good visibility of what they're working on. And when I mentioned shining a light on shadow IT, that's one of the things that I'm kind of talking about is how can we actually understand what's going on in the organization and how can we actually almost challenge the way that we work today and understand why is shadow IT forming and actually is there a different way that we should be interacting with people driving technology work in our organization. So that's really interesting. So if I go to kind of my key theory, I call this the vicious cycle of control. You know, when I moved from having a line role in IT and in business, and I moved to consulting, one of the things that really surprised me was how many projects I was being pulled into as a consultant to centralize IT. So I came in and you know, typical scenario, IT costs were too high, application growth is out of control, processes are fragmented, and IT is overall just difficult to manage and operate. I think probably many of you have seen similar challenges. I certainly have in where I've worked. And I was seeing this everywhere, from consumer goods to energy companies to pharmaceuticals to manufacturing to automotive. Pretty much everywhere I went, you kind of had the same problem. And the common response to that was, we need to run application rationalization projects, we need to run big kind of transformation projects to simplify and standardize our processes and our systems. And as part of that, almost in every case was this need to actually pull it in, to create stronger governance, to centralize IT, and you saw this pendulum swing from centralized IT to decentralized IT, centralized IT to decentralized IT. And essentially that was a tug of war happening between the business and the technology teams. I call this the vicious cycle of control. And what I really mean by that is, the start of the cycle for me is that changing customer behavior is driving the need for some technological change, and that's coming straight in through the business. Because things are quite centralized and there's long lists of priorities that we have to address, it took IT teams a long time to respond to that. And then as part of that, the business gets frustrated and they take matters into their own hands, and you start to see new technology teams form to deliver that change. As a result of that, you have a proliferation of initiatives, you have new applications being introduced into the environment, and as a result of that, guess what? Our landscape is even more complex. We don't have visibility of what's going on, and we become even slower at responding to things because we're too busy managing BAU. And that's really a pattern that I'd seen over the last 20 years. I don't know if you've seen similar patterns in your business, but that's just this pattern that I've seen going over and over, and it basically gets to a boiling point where costs are out of control, and there's a business case in front of the CEO to drive a big program to centralize IT, put in strong governance, and to centralize it, and that lasts for a while, but the cycle's already starting again. The business people are already saying, no, this is not working for me, I'm going to start taking matters in my own hands. Now, in a way, that kind of worked, because if you look at on the right side, the CIO spend, you essentially had, the IT teams basically had the budgets. 90% of the budgets were controlled by CIO in 2000. Now look at the way that that's completely changed, and I'm sure you're seeing this in your organization. 20% in 2020, according to Gartner, will be controlled by the CIO. So you have a massive, massive change, and you have a distribution of budgets being spread into the organization. So the reason that the business came to IT in the past is because it had to, because those were the budgets were held. But let's imagine a world, and we're already seeing it, where those budgets are not with a central enterprise IT team. They're taking matters in their own hands. And I think more and more business leaders will no longer accept that they can't move at the speed that they want to, and so you're seeing even more exacerbation of this problem taking place. So let's go into the next poll, and let's talk about, because I think one of the problems with this is how actually technology is positioned in the organization. So actually how your CIO is positioned in the organization. So I want to just get some understanding of your situation. Go to the next poll. Simple question: who does your CIO report into? Okay. That's very interesting. Because in the past, we saw where CIOs were often reporting into a chief financial officer when you had this kind of vicious cycle of control happening, because it was just seen as we need to control our IT spend. But I'm quite encouraged to see that 67% of you have your CIO reporting directly into the CEO. I think that is actually a really good sign. And to be honest, that's a little bit surprising to me, but it's a very encouraging sign, because we have seen that trend happening, and I'll talk a little bit about probably where that's happening. I don't know if that's been a change or if that's something that's always been in place. And the second question is, and you may or may not know the answer to this, but how often does your CIO present to the executive board? And even maybe the non-executive board, but how often does that happen? Yeah, and I would expect with the response in the first question that you have a CIO reporting into into your CEO that you'll see more frequency here. That's actually pretty encouraging. It's interesting that many of you don't know. That might be part of something you might want to know is how is technology engaging with the strategic business agenda. So if I think that's very interesting. And if I look at kind of what some of the problems are, and to be honest, based on your poll results, maybe it's not as big of a problem in this room, but in the past, IT was often viewed as kind of a back office function or something to be outsourced, not a core competency. And I've just pulled up a few stats that I found rather interesting. The first one is that, and you have bucked the trend on this one, but only 40% of CIOs present to the board of directors more than once a year. That's from 2014. And again, I think many of you don't have that problem, which is very encouraging. 66% was the growth of the outsourcing industry from 2000 to 2013. And the one that really strikes me is the third stat. 1%, less than 1% of all United States board directors have direct technology experience. Now that one is really interesting because one of the problems that we saw in the past, and again, maybe a lot of you in the room don't have this challenge, is that the business executives that really didn't understand technology at all. They didn't have a technology background, and in fact, they didn't even recognize the importance of understanding their technology. And you have this real disengagement from business leaders and the technology teams that we had seen. Worse yet, I think McKinsey said that, from a survey they did in 2014, the common mindset is that IT spending is like a tax required to keep the lights on. My theory now is that is significantly changing, and maybe that's a result of what you've seen in your poll results in the room. It's funny, if you look at the way CEOs are talking today, I just pulled a couple of quotes here. So Mark Field is the CEO of Ford. He said, I originally joined the auto industry because it was the ultimate industrial product. Now the car has become the ultimate technology product. So really seeing the automobile as a technology product. I also really like the chairman and CEO of BBVA, a Spanish bank. In the future, BBVA will be a software company. So if we had a past where business executives really didn't have a lot of understanding of technology, didn't have a lot of technology experience, they are certainly out in the marketplace now talking about technology, talking about becoming technology companies, and that's a dramatic change. And one of my hypotheses is in the room is perhaps with your CIO reporting into the CEO, you're starting to see more importance placed on technology in your organizations. But we certainly didn't always see that in the past. So why are these guys talking about this? Well, first of all, they've been bombarded with startups who are eating their lunch. And you guys know these stats, but if you just look at the industry disruptions that have happened from mobile handsets to taxis to advertising to hospitality, everyone knows the entertainment example of Blockbuster and Netflix. They've seen that industry after industry is basically being completely disrupted by some new tech player, and so they're actually scared. Meanwhile, the press is absolutely piling on, and one of my favorite quotes in this is the Wall Street Journal one at the bottom. FinTech in the room with banks, literally, and smelling blood. This is the kind of press that the business executives are reading today, and this is the kind of pressures that they have placed on them. And so suddenly, technology is now a core competency for business. But there's a problem. And as technology professionals, you'll know this problem. The rate at which technology change happens is exponentially faster than the speed at which business can keep up. So there's this massive gap between the rate that technology changes and the rate that business changes. So I call this the opportunity gap. And in my view, this opportunity gap is a very interesting opportunity for technology professionals, and it's a very interesting opportunity for probably every single person in this room. So we play a very key role in helping our business actually address this gap. I listed some of the top 10 technology trends from Gartner research for next year. The trends are broad. Everything from, and you know this, everything from 3D printing to autonomous vehicles to advanced architecture to Internet of Things. Every day our business executives are more and more being bombarded with these technology changes, and they're grappling with it. Now, when I mentioned at the beginning, I split my time between Silicon Valley and London, and one of the things, to be honest, I went out there, when I first went out there, I went out there in search of great tech. And what I found was there is, of course, great tech out there, and it's not just in Silicon Valley, it's in lots of places. But it wasn't about the tech. It wasn't the tech that was so great. It was the way that actually these tech companies were being built. And this is what I think a lot of business executives that I talk to are realizing. It's not about the tech, it's about the customer. And the thing that really struck me when I met these kind of young startups and building their businesses is the way that they designed their entire business was around a customer. They actually started with, you've probably heard of design thinking. They started with, what are the customer emotions that I need to tap into? What are the friction points? What are the things that really frustrate our customers? And how can I tap into that? And one of the things that they really focus on is, how can I find a profit pool that a big corporation has that has the most friction? And I'm going to go after that with a vengeance. And that's the way that a lot of these companies are actually working today. They go after that problem and they design their entire business and their technology around that customer experience. And it's not just the UI, it's the experience, the end-to-end experience. And I think that that's what the business executives are really trying to put their finger on now. So how can we leverage technology to create this amazing experience? Now, one of the interesting things about Uber, I don't know if you realized it, but I didn't know this until I found out. Uber obviously worked on a great customer experience. You need a taxi, you go on your phone, there it is, you can see the driver going until they arrive, etc. You walk out of the cab and you don't have to pay. It's all automatic. But one thing Uber did is they didn't actually spend a lot of money developing their own technology. What I learned was they actually just found out who has great technology for all the things that we need to do to enable this experience, and they actually outsourced a lot of that technology. So it wasn't actually about great tech. It was more about the experience that they were designing. The second example I put in there speaks to what I call kind of some of the changes in customer behavior. So at the top, you as consumers, you'll all relate to this. So one thing has not changed. We all want convenience, quality, good price, and good service. That's been true since the market was formed. But there is one thing that has changed. And I think it's because of two big innovations. One, the internet, and second, these smartphones that we're carrying in our pockets. What it's done, it's created this massive proliferation of choice. And so, yes, we still want convenience, quality, good price, and good service. But now there's just so much out there. It's not like we walk down to our shopping mall and we only have a few choices of what we can buy. We have everything in the world at our fingertips. And it's a bit confusing. So what customers now expect is something a bit different. They expect simplicity, something that's really, really simple, easy to use. They expect novelty. They want something that actually feels great and it's novel. They want immediacy. I want it now. And you've seen this with Amazon trying to deliver, do 1 hour delivery and those kinds of things. They want things now. You want things now. I want things now. And finally, they want something that's personalized. And if you look at some of the businesses that are being built today, they're really tapping into those emotional expectations. And I pulled up, Adam Bank is a new bank in the UK where I live. They just got a banking license in the UK. And they just also got a massive shareholder, I think it was BBVA, just invested heavily in them. But I just looked on their website, and I just looked at some of the words they use on their website. Uncomplicated, everywhere, telepathic, absolutely tapping right into those new customer expectations on the bottom side of the circle. So as I talk to business executives, what's on their mind is actually these key points. What I'd be curious to know is, in your business, are you getting these messages down? Are actually your business executives engaging the technology teams and you to actually help deliver this innovation agenda, is the first question. And second of all, what are those priorities? And so I'll go to the live polling again. Simple yes, no. Okay, so about 2/3 of you have innovation is really one of the top priorities in the company, and just under 1/3 of you don't have it. We do see some differences in depending on what industry you come from. Clearly, I've showed some of the industries that are getting really hit hard right now. Financial services is one of the biggest ones getting hit right now. Whereas you look in energy or in some industrial manufacturing, it's becoming a priority, but it's maybe not the top priority. Technology innovation. So, but even if 72% of you have it as a top priority, I'd like to know. So, what are those business priorities? And you can select more than one here. So, I'd be interested to know what are some of the big priorities you have in the business right now. Okay, interesting. One of the things I'm observing the cost agenda is a lower agenda at the moment, whereas we see also kind of one of the pendulum swings we do see is it's the cost agenda, no, it's the growth agenda, no, it's the cost agenda. It's interesting that the majority of you, I think really interesting, 23%, better serving customers via new business models. So that means that innovation is playing a key role, is looking at technology and how can we actually leverage technology to create a new business model and service our customers in different ways, offer them value propositions we don't offer today. And then of course the winner here is a digital customer experience, mobile and web, and that's no surprise, followed by big data and analytics, also not a surprise. And I think the security aspect's not something we should overlook either. That is pretty consistent with what I'm seeing with all the clients that I'm talking to today and all the business executives. I think that's actually very consistent. But what I see is a problem. And I've actually pulled together a slide. This is an actual IT operating model for an actual client I think it was from 2011. I will not reveal the client. For privacy purposes, and I've kind of made it a little bit generic so you can't guess. But you have this, and this is literally, their operating model. The business on the left side, giving requirements, and IT on the right side, managing demand, doing development, and operating. And there's a few, I don't know, does anything jump out at you? Anyone in the audience? Yeah? Exactly, siloed. Anyone else notice anything about that model? So siloed is, the fact, there's this big white space in the middle. Like I said, this is an actual IT operating model from an actual client. And there's a few really scary things, like escalation of requirements going up the chain. We can just imagine this big corporation and these requirements going up this escalation path on the business side, and eventually maybe it gets passed over to the IT team. And then this really scary thing, governance committees in the middle. Now that, I see a few of you smiling because we know what that's like, right? We have we have to have these forums and these governance committees and these steering committees to escalate and prioritize all the stuff that we want to do. And the poor IT team is just basically getting this dump. And we're trying to just facilitate a conversation. It's like, hey guys, we have to prioritize this stuff. But the big thing for me is that there's this gap. It's not, in fact, even the terms business and IT, I think those are outdated terms today, completely outdated. If we've seen an agenda where technology is a core competency and basically every business in this century is going to be driven by technology, certainly enabled by technology, then why do we still operate in this way? That really is kind of, for me, the glaring problem statement. And I know we've made progress, and I'm not going to profess to be a DevOps expert, but I do know a little bit about what we've done kind of around IT and how we've actually developed the DevOps solution. This is actually a slide from IBM that I pulled, how they describe it. But we've done a lot, I think, in kind of bringing development operations together, but it's still that gap with the business is still there. We're not really engaging with the business. And it's worse than that. It's being codified. So there's now consultants and analysts running around talking about two-speed IT, bimodal IT. They say everything that's in the systems of engagement, the front end, can go fast, can really go fast. And we can do rapid iterations, and we have an API catalog, and we can basically develop things really, really fast. And in the bottom, this is also from IBM, by the way, in the bottom, it's systems of record, literally on the slide, slow iterations. Systems of record slow, customer engagement fast. And this has become common language among executives. Oh, we need to be bimodal. And as I mentioned, consultants and analysts are running around saying, you need to be bimodal. Gartner said you need to become bimodal because one mode can't answer the complex needs of the organizations. Another research paper from 2014, 45% of IT departments have a fast mode of operation, and by 2017, 75% will be bimodal. Like that's some kind of an achievement. If you haven't noticed, I have a slightly different point of view. I do understand that this is probably where we are today, and based on where we are today, this is probably the right way of operating. But I would challenge, is it the place we want to end up? Is this the destination? Or can we actually envision a model where actually enterprise IT can drive time to value and faster time to market, just like front-end systems of engagement teams can? I think it's possible. So let's do another poll. Let's see what you think. So first of all, have you heard these terms? Is your company discussing this two-speed IT, bimodal? Okay, most of you are not hearing about that or don't know. It's interesting, that might be the case, or it might be that maybe it hasn't hit yet, because it's pretty loud in the analysts and consulting communities. And then going to the next question, what do you think? Do you agree with me? Do you think that actually bimodal IT, this kind of two speeds and operating concurrently, is the right model? Is it the right destination for where we want to end up, or is there something different? I'd be just curious. And just like bimodal, we're kind of split in that opinion. That's good. It's not an easy topic. It's not an easy topic. And it probably totally depends on the industry you're in and the setup and the priorities. So I understand that. Okay. Oops, I went too far. I'm operating two of these at once. So what I believe is, if we're going to truly work side by side with the business in enterprise IT, we have to get out of this mode where we need to constantly centralize and actually try to control and govern everything. Because when we did the poll earlier, most of you don't know what's happening anyway with shadow IT. So I think we need to actually say shadow IT is going to exist. There are going to be IT teams embedded in the business. There's going to be digital teams working on mobile and web solutions. There's going to be teams out there experimenting, exploring. There's going to be third-party vendors coming in with new ideas and new technologies. It's going to happen. And in fact, as I've said, the business is so hungry to find the next hot technology, the next thing that's going to deliver this great customer experience. They're going to latch onto things. So it's going to happen. My view is, rather than trying to control and fight that, we should actually say, how can we actually enable it to happen? Go the opposite. How can we actually support it? How can we support experimentation? How can we encourage people to bring in third-party ideas and experiment with that? I call this the virtuous cycle of enabling. So moving from this cycle of control to the cycle of enabling. And I've kind of outlined 4 things that I'll go through in a little bit more detail so we can put a bit of meat on the bone. First, I say establish and maintain what I call a platform for innovation. And I'll talk about this. This isn't necessarily a technical platform. This is maybe a way that you operate with the business. It might be some physical space that you have in your facilities to encourage people to work together. It might be in how you actually form teams and break some of the organizational structures that you have to actually work together. Second, as I mentioned, support the experimentation to happen. Help it happen. I'll talk a little bit about what one client did to build a safe sandbox they actually built a safe sandbox where they build in the integrations and some of the infrastructure so that actually when people had ideas from the business or from external teams or wherever, they actually could go run pilots and test it. And actually, the enterprise IT teams were right there alongside them, working with them, doing it. And when you do that, you get to your third point on the bottom. You start getting visibility of what technology is happening. What is happening? So again, back to that survey question, when you don't really know what's happening out there, you don't have very good visibility. If you're actually at the forefront of supporting this and enabling this, you're going to start getting that visibility. You're going to start learning, and then you don't have the situation where suddenly apps get launched in your environment and they blow up. Because at least you have a much greater chance of actually being involved, seeing what's happening, helping architect the solution up front rather than having it be done to you. And finally, drawing insights on ultimately how the customers are using the technology and how they're responding to the technology. I call this the virtuous cycle of enabling, and I'll give you kind of some examples of how we're seeing this happen. So the first is, this is an actual slide that I've been using with some of my clients and how they're actually thinking about innovation. So this is kind of a operating model for innovation, if you will. On the left side, you have idea generation, scouting, and prototyping. So you might see this in your organization, but basically what people are doing on the business side and with technology teams, they might have an outpost in Silicon Valley, they might go to Tel Aviv, they might go to London. They might be doing crowdsourcing of ideas, they might be going out and talking to venture capitalists, they might be talking to tech firms. They're getting those ideas and they're scouting for ideas. And what they're doing is they're taking those ideas and they're running these really agile, fast, iterative prototyping processes. Literally, we did this for an insurer in the UK a few weeks ago. Literally, I'm sure you've seen it, where you literally come up with the solution, and a lot of you talked about new business models, where we talked about, okay, so if we did this new business model, what would it look like? And literally drawing the design on paper and then going and actually testing in front of real customers on the street. Starting with paper and then moving to low-tech kind of UI tools to actually show, well, what if it did this and da-da-da. I mean, that is something that we're seeing. Almost every client I talk to is trying to do this and go faster and bring more speed into how they're bringing ideas to fruition. And then there's this really important phase where, they've gotten it, the customer wants it, it seems to make sense, and now it's got to somehow fit in to the architecture. And that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where people really start to have the problems. And there's kind of two ways that people go. In some cases, I'm seeing that there's actually a really good starting to be a good collaboration with enterprise tech, and those teams are actually like, okay, well, let's architect this together and actually figure out how this is going to work. In other cases, well, we can't make it fit with our existing legacy infrastructure and architecture, so we're going to go build it outside. You see these experiments happening completely outside, and those are really hard because if you're launching a completely separate business, that's fine. But if you intend to build this thing outside and then bring it in, I think if you haven't seen that before, certainly when we see that happening, it's really challenging. Most times it doesn't work. And then worse yet, maybe you start to get engaged with or hear about it when it's like, oh, we need to launch this. It's great. Customers love it. We're going to do this thing. And you're like, wait a second. How did this happen? So this is happening. People are talking about driving this kind of a model. And there's other things at the bottom that aren't as important, but I just wanted to show you the holistic picture, and you can have access to these slides. What I believe is, if this is happening, what role can you play to enable this process? And actually, how early can and should you get involved in this process to actually support this experimentation, to support this testing, and to do some of the architecting early? I think that's really the first challenge I would give you. The second thing they're doing, and I mentioned this kind of safe sandbox concept. So this is an actual very high level, as you'll recognize, kind of safe sandbox architecture that one of my clients in the UK built. They basically kind of created this logical, and they actually built this. They actually built this, and they're evolving it, over time. But they kind of created this place, and they've told the business leaders and other tech leaders and digital teams and marketing teams and everyone, hey guys, when you have ideas and you want to test things, or you're running a hackathon, or you're talking to the latest software vendor to do some new stuff, guess what? You can come test it here. You can actually start plugging in. We'll expose some of the data. We'll actually, start to show how you can pass data across. We'll start looking at the security behind it, so that when you want to implement it, the chief security officer and risk officer doesn't stop it. They actually built this because they're trying to encourage and actually promote experimentation and actually working on it. I think, this might not be applicable for everyone, but I think it's definitely something to think about and to consider. Could you do? As part of that process, this is an actual kind of funnel of a lot of the kind of third-party technologies that a lot of clients that I'm talking to are working with. And you'll see not all of them are, if you know some of these, or not all of them are like pure customer-facing. A lot of these are enterprise. In fact, most of these are enterprise technologies. They're doing research, they're doing speed dating, they're going and meeting these companies, they're running hackathons, they're out there, and they're running these funnels where they're actually trying to say, well, could we leverage this technology to do X or Y or Z? And it's coming through. And a lot of the companies that I'm talking to, almost all of them are running some kind of a funnel process like this. And if they're not doing it now, they're starting to build this kind of a process. So you're going to see more and more of this happening if you're not already seeing it in your company. Now, if you're involved in this, then you start to see that, you start to get that visibility of what technologies are being looked at, what's being experimented with. And I think that that's something, again, that you can and should engage with. And finally, the customer testing view. So this is a real lab that was built by AIB, which is an Irish bank. What they did, they built this bank branch where you could actually come in and actually customers could test the latest and greatest things that the bank was trying. And we've seen lots of examples of this. If you go in the US, if you go to Capital One in San Francisco, they built their lab on top of a bank branch, if you haven't already seen that. It's quite interesting. So up above is, like 2 or 3 floors of lab where they're experimenting with ideas and building stuff, and then they go, okay, that's good, let's take it downstairs. And they basically implement it into the bank branch. And then there's other things that have happened in the bank branch. They figured out, well, let's serve coffee in the bank branch, and suddenly they made it a coffee shop and a bank branch. And they said, well, why do we have baristas serving coffee in bank tellers? Why don't we actually train the baristas on how to advise on banking products? And so they did that. And so it wasn't just the tech, it was the whole experience. But this one's really interesting because one of my colleagues actually was the chief architect at AIB when they did this. And I asked him, I said, so, when were you involved in this launching of this thing? Because I can see this in some boardroom conversation. Hey, we're going to build this lab. It's going to be amazing. All this great technology. And, the poor, enterprise IT team knows nothing about this. And suddenly they get this, hand grenade lobbed over the wall. Says, oh, you got to help us support this. Luckily, he said, they really got it right. And probably one of the reasons they were able to do this in 7 months was that they involved the business teams, the digital teams, the enterprise architects and the data architects and the integration architects, and even the platform and infrastructure teams together, and they architected this together. And I asked him, so what did that process look like? How long did that take? He said, first of all, the conceptual design of what they did took less than a week. Because one of the lessons I've learned around a lot of how these kind of startups work in Silicon Valley is you don't spend a lot of time designing. You just design something that's good enough and then go out and test and do. You'll learn by doing. So they'd spent less than a week on conceptual design. This is what it's going to look like. This is how customers are going to interact. And we're just going to go for it, and we'll learn how it works. But then they did spend time architecting. And they actually, again, those 4 teams worked together on looking at the middleware, looking at the data architecture, really going through all of those, looking at the security. They spent 1 month blueprinting this together. Then they spent 2 to 3 months prototyping it, building it, testing it, getting it to work. And then finally, when they got that going after, I think it was 3 months, they then said, let's do a soft launch. Let's get customers in here and testing it. And then they did that for about 3 months, because it took about 3 months to kind of work out all the kinks. And in the beginning it wasn't very good, and then it got better and better over time. He said the reason that they could do that in a total of around 7 months was because the key was the fact that they all worked together from the start. that they weren't just thinking about the front-end digital experience. They were actually thinking about the infrastructure from day one. And that was something that was really important in how they were able to do that. The infrastructure teams and the integration teams have learning so much about how customers are adopting or not adopting some of this technology. They're also learning about, load balancing and basically how things are happening in this bank, how customers are interacting, and they're actually rethinking the way that they've been architecting things in the past. So they're learning from this experience. So this is the fourth phase of this virtuous cycle that I've shown in terms of how do you actually get customers to test what you're building and you start to learn from it. So recap of the themes. The first theme was, I believe that in the last kind of 20, 30 years, we've been in this kind of really tough cycle of actually trying to govern and control and keep a lid on everything from a kind of shadow IT standpoint. But the reality is today, business executives see technology as a core competency. So there's more and more pressure to actually for technology to be at the forefront of everything that our businesses are doing. And the speed of technology change is far outpacing the way the business can change. So our businesses need us to engage and be involved in this process. But our existing ways of working don't fit that new requirement. We have remember that gap between the business and IT teams. We have to close that gap. So I would encourage you to understand a bit more of how are they, if innovation is an agenda topic and if they're looking at new business models, how can you actually create that platform for innovation? How can you help enable and actually encourage the experimentation that has to occur? And how can you support that process? I'll pause there. Any questions or challenges or any perspectives in the room at all from anyone? Yeah?
So you talked about how much time you spend in concept design versus what going into architecture and then getting into like iterative process on it. How do you define measures along those lines and know how much time to spend in each one?
That's a good question. So the question, if you didn't hear, was how do you kind of measure and figure out how much time you should spend on conceptual design to actually getting into the prototyping phase? I was talking to somebody the other day, and they had a very similar question asked. And I said, to be honest, our number one measure is speed to learning. We just want to learn as quickly as we can. I met a guy called Tom Chi when I've been out in California. He was the head of Google X when they did Google Glass and those things. And I was asking them, I can ask you, so does anyone know how long it took to build the first working prototype of Google Glass? Anyone have a clue? It took 1 day. 1 single day. Now, that's so foreign to me in the way that I've worked, in the last 20 years. I'm like, how could you do it in a day? Number one, they didn't constrain themselves at all. They said, we don't need to build, we're not going to constrain ourselves with the materials we will use. So they used a chopstick and a pen and a little projector, and they got some glass, and they built this kind of clunky thing, pieced it together. Because what they were trying to do, they were trying to get to the point where they could learn how it worked as quickly as possible. So they didn't constrain themselves at all with the technology. They just said, let's get to the learning as quickly as we can. So that speed of learning is the key metric that I've seen people use. So as soon as you can, it doesn't matter if something's on paper, if you can get to a point where you can actually do a test and learn from it, you want to get there as quickly as you can, if that makes sense. Now clearly when the architecting comes in, they did do paper architecture. I mean, they had to basically say, this is how we think it's all going to work and how the data is going to pass and how the security is going to work. Of course they had to do that. And then they had to actually show that to different teams and say, so help challenge this. So in a way, they were testing and learning as well. They weren't doing it in a corner. They were getting out there and saying, here's our conceptual design. They're running sessions where people would come in and be like, yeah, that will never work because of da-da-da-da-da. Okay, well, how could we make it work? If that makes sense. So the quickest you can get to learnings is really the key metric. Any other observations, challenges, different points of view?
You were talking about organizing around the customer, right?
Yeah.
So as companies are large or they're organized that way, people are part of multiple customer teams, or is there a lot of dependency sometimes? Or
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah, it's another great question. So how are people organizing? If they're organizing around a customer, it's easy when you're a startup, right? Because you're small. So you can all organize around the customer. But if you have different divisions and different business units and different customer teams, how do you break that mold? there's kind of two pieces of work that I didn't really highlight today that are going on as well. One is actually how are you actually doing the architecture to enable this speed of testing on the technical side. But on the human side, there's how do we actually break our organizational boundaries? How do we actually organize teams around a problem, or around a specific thing? So there's this concept of, and this comes from Agile, and I'm not a deep expert in Agile, but I know it comes from kind of like product development, or coming up with a product owner. So you have that kind of a concept being formed. So we have this thing we think we're going to experiment with, and we're going to just see if it works, and it's maybe a new value proposition, and yes, it does not fit our traditional lines of how we're organized, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually organize around that problem, and we're going to form a team around that. And they create a product owner and a kind of a CTO behind that as well. And that's how that, and as that team is small in the beginning, and as that team goes through the testing process, then they build on that team. So that is something we're seeing. Okay. Good. I've been told that we need to wrap up, so thank you very much for your time. I hope that was useful. What I'll do is, maybe I won't publish this so much, but if you want to help me and just tell me how I did, I'll do a simple net promoter score for myself. So number 1, would you recommend this to a colleague? Just let me know so I have that feedback. And also something for you privately to take back. What are one of the things that you can do next week if you believed in some of the things I talked about today to actually help enable that innovation in your company? Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the trip. Thanks.